what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Sunday edition of Lambdas Who Roll Live. I am your host, Dr. Hernan, with my co-host, Professor Diego, and our special guest for today, Dr. Harnoor Singh. How are you guys doing today?
How are you guys?
Oh, so excited. Thanks for having me on, Professor Diego. Thanks for having me on, Dr. Hernan.
Absolutely.
I'm just super excited to just talk about what feels exciting for you guys. Yeah.
Awesome. We're definitely
Very
excited to
excited
have
about
you
that.
on our show. It was a pleasure meeting you a couple months back. I'm talking a little bit about how we met, how we got this going. I've been teaching at the Movement Lab for a little over a year now, and you came to one of my classes as an observer. I think at one of the seminars, I believe it was in the summer, and then you popped into one of my classes afterwards. And came to find out that you were a physical therapist. I had a hip issue at the time, and you hooked me up, and all of a sudden I walked out of there like a new man, and I was like, man, this guy has, you know, a wealth of knowledge that us as jiu-jitsu folk should
Awesome.
understand and benefit from. So I said, hey, we got to get you on the show so that way we can learn why we'll basically understand the meaning of pain and how we should react to that, and why physical therapy may be a good route to try to remedy some of those so that we can extend our life on the mat, right? That's basically what we're looking for. So I wanted to introduce or give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, where you're from, what got you into movements, because I see that you post videos of you dancing and doing all of these crazy acrobatic movements, which is amazing. I just want to understand, where that came from, and then also understand your journey into physical therapy. So,
Totally. Yeah. So I mean, to take it from the top, I think my first interactions with movement was probably like a lot of people's through sports, and I found out pretty early on in my high school career that I wasn't athletic, quote unquote, like where I wasn't the one that was starting on the football team. I wasn't creating any record-breaking times in track and field, and so I just kind of realized that hey, maybe this isn't for me. This type of like moving through the body. And so I think a lot of it changed when I got to college and I started exploring a lot of hip hop dance. So I just like realized, hey, with skill and repetition, or with repetition, you can build skill. And so I started developing a lot of skill through dance. And I used to just tell people back then, like, while I was like part of this hip hop dance team, like, dance can save the world. There's nothing like this where there's a community, there's so much uplifting and expression. And then I found yoga and I realized, wow, there's a whole nother thing here. There's a community, there's uplifting. So it's not only found in dance, it can be found in yoga too. And then I found rock climbing and I was like, oh, I think I'm just wrong. I think there's a lot out there. And so I just started exploring movement over and over and over, uncovering chapters. And eventually found myself going to physical therapy school, wanting to just like to get the deepest understanding I could of how the body moves. And when it came to specializing, within my field, I really just found myself wanting to constantly train with the broadest lens possible. So instead of looking at like concepts of disciplines, like wanting to become a dancer or wanting to become a rock climber or wanting to become a fighter, I wanted to develop like a skill set that just let me move through all mediums of movement. And so I ended up finding out that somebody had already done this, and this was Ido Portal, who's a famous general movement practitioner who kind of just took away the concept of getting good at one thing, but just getting good at knowing how your body works so you can kind of move through fields. And from there, getting to have the anatomical understanding of physical therapy and train under his lineage in Colorado. There's a gym called APECO. I started training under their teachers for a couple of years. That's what really broadened my dictionary. It let me zoom out, and it also just started letting me jump into a lot of different types of classes. Some days I was doing kickboxing for a couple months. Some days I was back to rock climbing, and it just really let me feel like while I'm practicing a yoga pose, yes, it's going to help my kickboxing. While I'm practicing kickboxing, yes, it's going to help my rock climbing. And let me see how interconnected all these movement concepts are. Within all that, I mean, just to bring it back to physical therapy, I started working with FX Physical Therapy. They're partnered with Under Armour. So I just told people that I wanted to see the forgotten athletes. I think most people, when they become a sports physical therapist, they want to see football and basketball, and of course, all the love to those sports. But I really wanted to see the dynamic movers, people who were very integrated in a complexity of angles, like not just a bench press, but something that looked a lot more dynamic. So I chose the dancers, I chose the fighters, I chose the gymnasts and the rock climbers, and the yogis, because they were the ones that were just involved in a huge dictionary of movement, and required somebody who also could see a dictionary within that. So yeah, since then I've been getting to treat a lot of BJJ fighters, and I've only done jujitsu for 6 months ish, so I'm still a huge beginner, but I'm a deep appreciation of the practice. I mean, I just listen to so many jujitsu podcasts in my free time just for the martial artist state of mind, like listening to John Donaher and Faraz Sahabi and just all these people that are like talking about ethics of jujitsu as well as just the practice. So it's been an exciting journey, and I'm excited to also take that deeper.
That's awesome. No, we definitely appreciate you as part of the jiu-jitsu community. I know you've been a big benefit to the movement lab, not necessarily just with physical therapy, but also your love and passion for movements, right? Because you've done your seminars on handstands, and then in the passing, you got people like me asking, hey, I have a little bit of pain here. What can you advise? And so to start things off, before we kind of get into the technical things, I wanted to ask you, what is one of the funniest or craziest situations where you found yourself giving advice? And the reason why I ask is because I saw this video not too long ago where a physical therapist who practices jiu-jitsu would walk into the gym, and from the minute he walks into the gym all the way till he changes and rolls, and he's doing his thing on the mat, he's constantly asked about a situation. Hey, my neck hurts. What do you advise? What is the funniest situation that you found yourself being asked advice, and how did that go? I was curious to find that out.
Yeah, that's a fun question. I've never been asked that. But right away, a situation pops up into my mind is my older brother and I, like whenever we're going around, he often introduces me through my profession. So I'll be like, oh, this is my brother. He's a physical therapist.
Right.
And he knows that I'm involved in a specialty of physical therapy that's focused on the spine. And so I can get pretty quick results with people sometimes. And so we're waiting in line to get into a club for dancing, and we meet the people in front of us, and he says, my brother's a physical therapist, and the guy goes, "Oh, I have neck pain," and I'm very strong when it comes to the spine. I can like diagnose very quickly, and so it's just maybe 4 minutes till we get to the front, but I'm doing PT exercises on the guy in front of me before we get into the club, and he couldn't move his shoulder because his neck was so tight and was causing, like we call it, radicular symptoms from the neck were entering the shoulder. And yeah, just like luckily through the help of my mentors, like within 4 minutes he had full range of motion in his shoulder, and I never saw the guy again. But that was just a quick treatment that I got to do, and I tried to like quick just send him some diagrams and say like, yo, you should still see a PT after this, but I'm happy that like we could have a mini breakthrough in your process while we're waiting to dance a night at the club.
Interesting. Did it get you to the front of the line, or get you a VIP, or something?
If I did it on bouncer, I'm sure next time it'll be better.
True.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. I have some questions of my own. I mean, I really appreciate it. And the way that you're connecting your passion, what you enjoy, to your profession you know, um, is beautiful, because for us as well, when we can connect things on and off the mat, it makes sense. It starts connecting in more than just training and working out or whatnot. So, and then you mentioned rock climbing, which is for us, it's it helps with the grips. And so one main thing that myself and I know that a lot of other practitioners, I'm very stubborn when it comes to pausing when I know that there's an injury or whatnot, right? Because at times it feels like the more we wait, the more we prolong, I mean, like, kind of sit off the mat, we kind of like it makes it difficult to come back on the mat. So the longer the break, the more difficult it is to come back to training, with jiu-jitsu, because it's so intense. What is the advice, or like, what is that threshold, like, between time? Like, how can we balance that out? Because, we don't want to stay off the mat, but we know our injuries should be taken care of in a certain way. What is your advice on that? I'm not sure if.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're asking like when somebody gets injured, how do they know how much time they should take off, and like also just maybe like assess the intensity of the injury, and should they
Right.
keep coming to practice? So I mean, this is definitely case by case, but let's just like maybe make up a case and see like how that case could go. So we'll say like Greg is doing jujitsu and he like hurts his wrist a little bit, or I'll actually, yeah, we'll say hurts his wrist a little bit. I think the very first thing that you need to just assess on your own is within a couple days, is the risk getting better or worse, right? That right there is my very first question for patients. Whenever they walk in the door, I ask, like, first off, what happened? And then I ask, since then, is it getting better or worse? Because it just gives me so much insight on how pissed is the tissue? How irritated is it? Is it something that it's right now on the path of healing? Or is it something that right now is constantly getting aggravated? And if it's in a state where it's healing, like every day is a little better than the last, I think that's like right there a really good sign. Like for me at least, that the patient is currently not putting themselves in experiences of aggravation. And if that person is still going to jujitsu while their injury is getting better, I would say for sure continue and do a little rehab, right? So there's this phrase, it's like work around your injuries, right? Um, we definitely I'm a huge fan of that, and that's one of the things I pride myself in as a physical therapist the most, is when somebody comes sees me, I actually do my very best to not let them be taken out of practice. That is like the last step on my radar. So like if somebody comes in, sometimes a physical therapist, they might not know much about gymnastics, so somebody might have a sprained wrist and they'll say cut gymnastics, and I'm
Right.
like, well, you could probably use the parallel bars because they put a lot less pressure on the wrist. You could probably do this, but just don't do that. So I try to differentiate what are the aggravating factors in their practice and how much they can still practice.
Awesome.
So that being said, yeah, I think it's definitely a case by case scenario. The first assessment is it getting better or worse? And then also like how can I create like somewhat of more attention or a rehab process throughout? So like is this a condition that's lasted 2 weeks and is now on its way out the door, or has it been like 6 months? Because that there comes a point where you have to like draw a line and say, I just want this to be a period and not a comma and another run-on sentence and then a comma and then a run-on sentence. Like I want a period. Like this injury is now healed and I'm coming back to my lifestyle. So I think that's what we're really good at as PTs, is putting that period on the story, so somebody can come in, they're like, my shoulder has some discomfort, it comes in, it goes, it comes in, it goes, it's been going on for the past 6 months to a year. So we're like, let's just do a robust rehab process. Let's keep you on the mat maybe while we're doing it, and we'll slowly increase the intensity, and then when we're ready to put that period on, then here's just some tools that if you ever do find yourself in a comma again and another sentence starts with that shoulder, here's the tools that you can put your own period in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I'm sorry. I think that jujitsu is one of the, and I mentioned this to one of the students recently. I think it's the one of the only arts, that you can train. I mean, now with other things that you've experienced, but jujitsu, one of the things that you can train while you have an injury, because you can focus on other, um, parts of your body, other strategies. And then also we link it to, if you were ever on the street, the situation is not going to be friendly to you to, worry about your injuries or worry about your disabilities, unfortunately, right? So it's a good way to kind of, either develop a new strategy, a different mindset, working through, I guess, those injuries. So I really appreciate that advice.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about martial arts practices, is that, like you said, there is a connection to injury that's involved in the real setting of the practice, which is like if you're in an actual self-defense situation. you will have to navigate your body fully there. Um, there's just one last thing that comes to mind, which is I don't think that anybody, like, no matter how severe the injury is, can't continue to progress in their jiu-jitsu while they're injured, because there's just so much you can do from a sets and reps game. Like, maybe you can't live roll, but there are so many techniques within jiu-jitsu that you could be practicing
Right.
softly, moving through the patterns, getting the brain a lot smarter, and continue to progress until your tendons, joints, ligaments are in their healing process. So what I get most scared about is when somebody's hurt and I ask them, who's in your gym that you're rolling with, and they're rolling with a bunch of white belts. That gets me nervous, because then I'm like, these are practitioners that may not know how to handle your injury. But if they're practicing with somebody that's at a much higher level, I'm like, let me just speak to this purple, brown, black belt. Let me just tell them about your injuries, what they can't do, the intensity. And I know that there won't be as much of a, like, a just disconnect where the person might lose control. There'll be so much control in this situation, and the person can get a lot of clean sets and reps in and have a full practice without aggravating their tissue. And then they come to PT and continue to rehab the process, and will slowly increase the intensity.
You have the mindset of the black belt already,
Yeah,
so
it's
you're good
interesting.
to go. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, because that's very. It's not easy. Excuse me. It's not easy to, we kind of gear towards higher belts for that reason. A lot of the times, everybody gives you a different challenge from white to black. But when you are injured, especially as a profession, it is a little bit more challenging, right? You don't want to be, off the mats. You can be injured because of your work. So yeah, it's definitely the right mindset.
That's interesting. And just to add to that, it's interesting that you mentioned the importance of communication. It sounds like communication is key when you have a certain injury, and seeking out the right training partners that are going to understand um, your challenge at that moment, physical challenge at that moment, so that they can uh, uh, um, help contribute to your progress, even though you have some limitations. And that's very interesting, because I've been the type that I don't like to communicate my injuries when I roll. The reason why is because I feel like it changes the mindset of the individual as they approach the roll. However, what I do is I have a mental note of my challenge, and I try, like you said, try to put myself in situations where I may not necessarily compromise my situation even further. Because I've noticed that anytime I go, hey, you know what, I got a shoulder injury, can you
They
take it easy
don't.
today? They stay
Interesting.
away from that position. Yeah, and they'll focus on something which I think is good, which I think is probably the best thing to do. But then it makes me feel like I don't necessarily um, mentally put myself in a situation where I have to mind that injury, right? So for me, it's I prefer not to say it, but mentally keep a note. But that's me, I guess, at this level, right? I could say
Yeah,
that at this level I could do that. Probably not the best thing to do as a white belt, because you don't have the techniques and tools to work around it, like you mentioned. So, but that's interesting that you mentioned communication is definitely key.
Yeah, awesome.
And one other thing you mentioned, which is interesting, and this was one of my questions, was that common expression of work around your injuries. That's so oftenly stated in the jiu-jitsu community. Hey, work around your injuries. And I wanted to ask, is this a smart thing to do? And I'm happy that you mentioned that. Yes, obviously, with I'm sure with limitations, but it sounds like that jiu-jitsu has enough, so much involvement that you can put yourself in a situation where you can mind your injury, but at the same time benefit from being on the mat. So that's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm glad that you said that.
And so jumping into kind of, I guess, hopefully connecting this other point. What is the when do you jump into the whole surgery, uh, you know, decision? Like, is it should we give our body a chance through,
Natural healing.
and yeah, natural healing and extensive, physical therapy process, because I know a lot of times when you go in, one of the fears is when you go in, you get checked out, it's a quick, hey, you know what, do you want to do surgery? It's X, Y, and Z reasons or whatever. And I know to each his own, everybody's decision is different, everybody's opinion is different. But what is your take on that?
Yeah. It's a question we have like every single day with our patients. Like people are constantly asking about that word, and there's definitely benefits to surgery. We see them all the time, and it is definitely overprescribed as well, um, in the sense that there's just been so many studies where people have like had a rotator cuff tear. They'll get an MRI, and the physician will see, hey, you have a rotator cuff tear. What's and I want to jump down that road in a second about the rotator cuff tear, just because it's such a helpful understanding on how MRIs work and whether you should really care about your MRI results. But before I do that, I think the biggest thing that needs to be said is that everyone should be an advocate for their own body and not just necessarily listen to what a physician, surgeon, or physical therapist says. So the very first thing is, if you go to your physician and they say, hey, because there's three major options with every injury. It's either A, like a shot of some sort, like a shot or a pill, a pain reliever. It's B, a surgery, or it's C, physical therapy. Those are your three options pretty much every time, no matter what injury you have. So sometimes people will go in and 6 weeks of PT sounds like cumbersome to a physician. So they'll just right away go for A. They'll say, hey, just take the shot, come back again in 6 weeks. For me, I'm actually not a huge fan of cortisone shots. There's a lot of research that says like, hey, you can get a cortisone shot maybe once a year, but any more than that, and you're starting to actually lose bone density. That's a problem, the idea of losing bone density from a cortisone shot. So, like, for me, I'm always saying try PT first. There's a whole campaign right now amongst physical therapists saying that try PT first before your pain medication, before your surgery. And sometimes physicians won't be the one to tell you that. And that's where you have to be an advocate of your body and say, hey, before you put that shot in my body, can I just try and rehab it and see what happens? And the success rate is high, like in most injuries. Like most, and in my day to day, I would say 90% of my patients are getting better. 5%, I get to a point where I go, we might need to look at surgical options for this. So that being said, like it's really worth rolling the dice, trying physical therapy for 6 to 8 weeks, and also making sure that the physical therapist is a good fit for you, because it's like dating. Like you might not have found the right PT for you. Go on another date, check out another physical therapist, see if the connection is right, and try that. Maybe, like, I'm not saying try that for the next 3 years, but I'm saying maybe give it 1 to 2 shots. Ask around, do a little research on what is this PT a specialist and what I want to be involved in. Be an advocate of your body. And yeah, that's how I would suggest delineating the idea between PT and surgery. Are there beneficial surgeries? For sure. But I definitely think it's overprescribed. Just the example I wanted to give, the example that I wanted to give was with rotator cuff tears, that I was saying MRIs for the rotator cuff tears. This is just an example.
Right.
Like most people over the age of 40 have a rotator cuff tear. Almost everybody. Like it's like 60 to 70% of people over the age of 40 have a rotator cuff tear, and they have no pain. So all of a sudden, let's say I have a rotator cuff tear for 10 years, just because I'm older. And then I get an MRI because my shoulder's been hurting for the past couple of weeks, and it shows a rotator cuff tear. They've been showing that might not even be the reason for my pain. But because like I have that rotator cuff tear, the physician will say that's the reason for your pain. So we need to start really like letting go of imaging, MRIs as our number one diagnosis. And instead, they found that PT evaluations are higher in diagnosis accuracy than MRIs in a lot of cases. So it's really worth our time to, yes, we look at the MRIs, but we don't like put, like, I can't tell you how many times like a person's shoulder will get better in PT and they'll go, but my MRI said it's torn, it'll never come back. And I'm like, that doesn't even matter. Like the image might have been that even before the pain. So we don't want to like over involve ourselves in a black and white image that's very scary. Like a lot of people, they start labeling themselves with that image. And then they'll take drastic measures to even get a surgery right away without even consulting any physical therapy. So
Right.
I'm biased. No.
Interesting.
No, that definitely makes sense. And I think people underestimate the power of the body and having and investing in an opportunity to strengthen certain areas that it will be enough or maybe even better than surgery. And I'll give you an example. So I was in a IBJJF tournament as a blue belt, and I think Diego was there. And I got taken down very, very hard. I ended up landing on my shoulder, the point of my shoulder, and I tore my AC joint. So when I went to the hospital immediately because I couldn't move my shoulder. We went to the whole routine, took the MRI, X-ray, MRI, and they said that I have a type 3 tear. So basically, the joint is completely snapped. When I went to the orthopedic doctor, he did give me the two options. He said you can have surgery, or you can just do PT. And at the time, being younger, being in very being an athlete, focusing on jiu-jitsu and competition at that point, he said I have enough muscle structure just to strengthen that area, build scar tissue and muscle around it, where I can have the same level of movement and rotation as I would just having surgery. And he said maybe later on down the road when you get older, you could think about it, but you don't necessarily need it. And I found the value of PT at that time. That was the first time I went to physical therapy. I can remember that, me going, not necessarily as a kid. I'm sure that I went as a kid, but me going, I want to say it was like 12 weeks because it was pretty long. And we did everything. And after that, the shoulder was good enough to go back to training. Obviously, it looks a little strange, right, with the collarbone kind of sticking up a little bit. And maybe I can't really do pull-ups as well, but I found the value in investing that time into strengthening that area rather than kind of resorting to just the surgery, right? So I think there is a huge value, and I don't think many people, one, might want to invest the time like you mentioned because it is extensive, and two, understand how powerful the body is in being able to adapt to a certain situation and strengthening a certain area, like with back problems, or knee problems. You got to strengthen the quads and strengthen the lower back, and that does wonders for your knee problem, right? So, but that's just, it's amazing how I think it's important. I think we should advocate more for that than resorting to just what you said, option A or option B before option C.
Do you see other physical therapists training jujitsu or like? Because I know that once you're in the field, you know the community, you know who's doing what. Do you see them interested or into jujitsu
Physical therapists in general.
in general? Yes, in general.
I
Or,
think in sports PT, like it's a higher percentage of people that are like open to that conversation, not necessarily like practitioners, but familiar with it, just because it's our jobs to be familiar with a number of sports. Within my like actual like circle in Baltimore, I can think of two other physical therapists that also are interested in treating martial artists and are exploring that concept in full. Um,
awesome.
there is one thing I do want to like. It's not a question you guys asked, but I think it's just so important to say on this podcast. Is
Absolutely.
it okay if I?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead,
absolutely.
shoot it.
Please.
Sure. So I think that like a lot of people think of physical therapy um, as rehab, but we also like they say an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And so that's something that I think I would love to talk about. Do you guys want to jump in on that
Yeah,
beforehand?
that was actually going to be my next question about should physical therapy be a routine or maybe part of a training camp, or is it just rehabilitation? So it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm curious to find out, can I include that in my day-to-day training, right? Rather than, oh, here I go, I have an injury and now I got to go to rehab. So I'm curious to find out to hear your perspective on that. So go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great question in itself. I think like I'm gonna first just take it from the broadest lens, like the everyday individual, whether they're a jujitsu practitioner or not. For
Hmm.
me, I really am gunning for the idea. I'm really hoping for the idea that people get yearly evaluations with physical therapists, just like they get with physicians. And that you have like just like how you have a relationship with your physician for the next 40 years, you have one with a physical therapist from the younger years to your elder years where somebody's just following you in your journey through your body and like assessing you like every year, because there's times where people will come in and I'll give them assessment and they'll go, I didn't even know my shoulder could hurt when this happens. Again, because I'll put them in an awkward angle that should be healthy but can aggravate an aggravated shoulder, and they'll go, I didn't even know that would aggravate my shoulder. And so like yearly checkups on posture, yearly checkups on how you're walking, how you're moving, not to the point where you're becoming like obsessed about it. Some people get over obsessed with like, am I walking the right way? But no, but like there's ways to just be a little more efficient in your patterning systems, could be really helpful for just an everyday individual. Like once a year, get a checkup, find out, are there any irritations underlying in your body? And like, here's a small little program for you, 2 weeks, that can like help regenerate some of that tissue.
Nice.
So that's like the first aspect. Then to bring it to jiu-jitsu, rather than the question like, can physical therapy be a part of your training program? I think the first thing I want to say is like, should therapy like of any kind, like meaning like even exercise therapy, like just you exercising your body, be a part of your training program? And for me, that's a hard yes. Like I think a lot of people who are involved in jiu-jitsu, there are people who are involved at a high level. Should they be practicing mostly jiu-jitsu? For sure. Like the Gordon Ryans out there need to be doing 4 to 5 hours a day. But for many people that are just practicing jiu-jitsu, like, but they have a daytime job and they're trying to get on the mat like 2, 3 times a week, I think a lot of people look at that as their form of exercise as well, and their form of therapy, and they look a lot to that as how they move their body, which has immense benefits. Immense. That being said, it's also important to cross-train your body to prevent the idea of injuries from occurring. There's a concept, specialization pays a price, right? Doing one thing over and over pays a price. So one of the healthiest things you can do for your shoulder is throw something. Like you throw a tennis ball, you throw a baseball. It's so healthy for shoulder mechanics, how you generate force. You find a baseball pitcher who's throwing 800 times, all of a sudden they have rotator cuff tears. So what was therapy all of a sudden became problematic. And so the same thing can happen where a jiu-jitsu fighter can, like these patterns are so healthy for our body to be rolling on the mat, to be moving. But if it's the only patterns they're accessing day in, day out, it actually increases their chances of injury. And that's where cross-training can really help build in new angles on your joints, on your tendons, to build robustness instead of just pounding the same angle over and over and over. Luckily, jiu-jitsu is dynamic enough that it has a lot of angles compared to like somebody who bench presses only. That's one angle. In jiu-jitsu, there is a lot of angles, but there's still too many patterns that are overused. Like, for example, in your guard, your spine is flexed. Almost in all jiu-jitsu, your spine is flexed. There's very little extension moments happening. And so because of that, like chances of like different types of dysfunctions in the spine increase because it's the only motion you're accessing in your spine. And so usually when I'm seeing a jiu-jitsu practitioner and they have spine pain, I'm extending their spine because it's just a motion they haven't even experienced in some time. They've probably lost a lot of mobility in it. So that's one pattern. But in general, when you're putting that much stress on your joints, because you're literally trying to, have people tap and constantly putting people at end ranges in their positions throughout practices. And if you're doing that 3 times a week with no other training within the midst, your injury chances go a lot higher. And so my recommendation is like, and this is like, I'll give just a example. Like, of course you want to progress in your craft. And so you have to specialize to an extent in your craft, right? So you look at someone like George St. Pierre, right? He was just talking about this. He said, even though I had to be the best in my field, I made time for cross-training for my therapy. He said, I used my cross-training, like, because some people will look at him doing the gymnastics work. He's doing cartwheels. He's doing, like, by no means is his cartwheel, I mean, perhaps, like, I would even argue it does help his punch, right? Learning how to snap, learning kinetic power like that. But he says, I don't think there's any crossover. He's like, and even with that, I still make time for it, for my therapy, to make sure I'm hitting new angles in my body. So what I would suggest is, if somebody's serious about their craft, or just even playfully engaging jujitsu, like, oh, twice a week, if you have, let's say, 3 hours, depending on what your goal is, you should divvy up some of 3 hours a week. I mean, you should divvy up some of that for cross training, some of that for your actual practice. And so, if somebody is looking for overall the opportunity just to live a lifestyle of longevity and have the ability to like be nimble and move, my suggestion is would be like, in your white belt stages, that is the time to hone in um, on not only your jiu-jitsu practice, but also the strengthening of your tendons, the strengthening of your muscles, and so on and so forth. So having a split in your training where twice a week you're doing 30 minutes of like strength work, like just proper strength work, loading your tissue, learning how to do like I'm a huge fan of gymnastics, so I usually use gymnastic calisthenics, like learning pull-ups and proper dips, and just putting like gentle progressional load on your joint so it keeps coming back stronger. And also then going to the mat, learning the basics of all the movement patterns from guard and so on and so forth, so that you're getting the very specialized approach. Your joints and ligaments are feeling what it's like to be under jiu-jitsu pressure, but they also are building a robust system in general from your cross training. And so it's a really tricky equation. Like, you spend too much time in cross training, you don't get better at jiu-jitsu. You spend too much time at jiu-jitsu, you actually can feel uninspired at times. You might not even be able to, like, one, seek inspiration, but two, your joints and tendons will also suffer. And so yeah, it's definitely a case by case scenario how much of what you do. But my biggest suggestion would be like having some sort of programming, whether it's like even 15 minutes before practice starts. Hey, before 15 minutes before practice starts, I'm going to do this routine. And what's the routine? That's a different conversation. What I think jujitsu practitioners should use as a routine to like just floss out any type of discomfort. But as a general rule of thumb, the basics are nice: push ups, squats, pull ups. Just starting there and having a routine where you're just building capacity and basic motions and loading your joints and slowly increasing that capacity before and adding in the mat work can be a therapy in itself. So that's what I would say. Like, as far as should it be part of your training process, for sure we should have some cross training that should be your therapy, and a physical therapist can assist that. And then also looking into a physical therapist like every 3 to 6 months for any nagging injuries as a rehab measure can also be done. So there's the prehab and then there's the rehab aspect of it. And so I hope that like kind of brought to me.
No, yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I'm curious if we can have this conversation even further because I'm sure I'm opening up a gym in a couple months, and obviously in my mind, the thing that plays is the routine that I've been drilling for the past 12 plus years, and it would be awesome to be able to add something like this, especially in the fundamental classes, the white belt classes. Maybe 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after or 10 minutes after, where you end your rolling session, the sparring session. You still have 10 minutes left, and you have a cool down basically. So implementing maybe stretching, but it would be awesome to hear from you. What would be the best thing? Okay, for these particular group white belts who are just starting off, maybe instead of cool downs, stretching or whatever, we can do some light calisthenics and then maybe stretch, right? I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you can help me develop a small program that we can do routinely, and implement that at that stage. And then obviously also hear what we could do for the advanced students. Because I'm listening to you and I'm like, man, as a white belt, I didn't do that. I didn't do pull-ups and sit-ups, pull-ups and push-ups or anything like that. I'm wondering, is it too late for me? I'm 40 plus years old. Could I also invest in that so that I can strengthen those? Because I'm sure Diego and myself, we we don't complain about it, but we feel it, right? I feel it definitely in the knees and stuff like that. And we've talked about that. So it'd be good to see if if we can do that, for students.
So yeah, with that being said, as far as those people who are coming into jiu-jitsu now, they have a huge advantage as far as education of jiu-jitsu, and then even advice like this. So I tell those people who do something extra, we weren't advised to strengthen condition,
Right.
to drilling was, it was great, but it wasn't kind of pushed, it wasn't really a priority. So at the end of the day, these things that are very important for your body to stretch, to maintain your body, because the longevity of it. So for me coming into jiu-jitsu as a martial artist, like into the martial art and coming from kung fu, for example, I don't think of jujitsu. I didn't think of jujitsu as a lifetime journey, but in reality, it becomes it, and it is, because it's not just about training. It's not just about rolling. It's about everything that's connected to it, right? On and off the mat, idea. So this is very, very important, right? Because I wish I didn't have so many injuries. Because I, not to be this competitor or whatever the case may be, or something elite, but just to keep jiu-jitsu in my life healthy, right? To be able to move properly without hurting the next morning, with an aching back type of thing. So but this is huge. This is very important. Like, I appreciated everything that you said, so far, and so many questions come from it. But I know, uh, time is limited. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think though, just to like reach a general concept to answer most questions, it's not about the movement that we choose that matters. It's the concept within the movement. So I said push up, pull up, squat, but not because like the push up is the perfect angle and the pull up is a perfect and the squat is like you could
Right.
you could just change those exercises out, but something that's just building load capacity
Mm.
slowly. It could be a bench press. It could be there's so many patterns. I just would suggest having like multi-planar movements as well. But like the point is that like I hope somebody doesn't hear this and then decides they're gonna do 3 years of push-up, pull-up, squats, because that
Right.
actually would
Right.
do the opposite. Because then yeah, it's the whole baseball pitching thing where they're like
Yeah.
they just took a thing that was supposed to rehab them and they drilled it into the ground, and what served them no longer serves them. So it's about creating enough like material that you keep changing up. So like maybe 3 months of push up, pull up, squat. 3 months later, let's switch up an angle so that the joint feels a new pressure. Cross training, not just training two things to the floor, but
Yeah.
it's like cyclical.
What are your thoughts on like stretching before jujitsu? A lot of people have either like a static stretch, they take nice long, a few seconds into the stretch, and then other people do dynamic stretches. They kind of just warm up the bones, and the body a different way. What's your take on? For me, I kind of whatever I feel that day, I feel like sometimes I need that static stretch, and sometimes my body is loose enough just to kind of get into a more dynamic. What's your take on that? Because I know some people just stick to a specific routine that's their thing, starting.
Yeah. So we're talking pre-practice.
All right.
Before practice, what I'm usually advising is how can we get the body temperature up? How can we get the body temperature as high as possible, get to a sweating point, and at the same time, put certain positional pressures on that feel realistic to the activity. So if somebody's wanting to become an Olympic weightlifter, right, and they're about to do their clean jerk, or we'll just say bench press. Somebody's about to bench press. I usually want them to do some sort of like global warm up just to get a little bit of sweat, and then a very highly specific warm up to their craft where they're actually going to bench. And so, like, if somebody is trying to bench press 200 pounds, we're going to start off first with a global warm up to the point of sweat. And then I'm going to have them bench press 45 pounds for maybe 10 reps. Then we're going to go to 90 pounds and we're going to do it for 6 reps. Then we're going to 150 pounds and we're going to do that for 4 reps. And then 185 for 2 reps. Just progressively loading, getting all the tissue ready for that 200-pound, and not tiring them also before they hit the 200-pound, right? So like the idea for a jiu-jitsu would be some sort of like opportunity to get to a point of sweating, right? And then eventually becoming more specific. So I'm a huge fan of dynamic stretching beforehand. There is one studies change, so I don't want to like go too hard into this, but they had a bunch of professional football players do static stretches before their games, and they had another group do dynamic. And the people that did static stretches, where they just try to touch their hamstrings for 60 seconds 3 times before they ran sprints, actually doubled in hamstring injuries. So they found out that static stretching can actually be a hindrance in that study. Like, am I saying don't static stretch? No, because I'm sure in a year from now I'll eat my words, or 5 years from now they'll come up with a new study. But what we're seeing right now is the opportunity to get the tissue really warm and pliable is a fantastic way to start. And static stretching is a really great way to tune the nervous system back down. So after a practice, like, you this is a whole different conversation. You actually don't want to hold tension after you're done rolling. Like, after the whole experience, it's not that you want to then like be like holding tension at the office, like as if you're about to roll again, right? So you want to have a system that cools you back down, like tunes your nervous system back down. And static stretching is a great way to do that. Soft breathing, things like that, where I have this experience, you see a lion, you go into fight or flight mode, you're in your fighter, like this is in our DNA from prehistoric times. I see a lion, I need to run. That's what's happening in a jiu-jitsu round, right? Like, we're rolling, I'm seeing a lion, my sympathetic nervous system, my fight or flight is full engaged. I'm in it. I'm sweating, everything's ready. And then all of a sudden the lion leaves. I don't want to still keep looking like this around, So when I leave the mat, I do want to calm my nervous system down. I don't want to hold tension in it. And that just has loads of benefits, from learning how to cool down to like mental benefits to also like tissue benefits, so that your tissues don't tighten up on you, and you start developing like less range of motion. So yeah.
And it's interesting I never thought of it that way, where if you just walk off the mat without going through that calming stage or the cooling down stage, that even though you might not be expressing it on the outside, internally you're still going through some type of emotional state that may impact how you act or react afterwards. Given your experience with jiu-jitsu, attending a class and stuff, when the routine is you bow in, you start kind of running, you do your basic fundamental movements like shrimping and hip escaping and so on and so forth. Then after that may not cool down. I know for myself, out of just accustomed to what I experience, we don't necessarily stretch, but I see a lot of other gyms that they do that. Based on your experience, I mean, with different gyms or within your experience, what do you advise would be the best way to get to that warming up stage that kind of correlates to jiu-jitsu, and then maybe that cooling stage that also will benefit with kind of keeping within that jiu-jitsu lens?
Yeah. So I think that warm up is great. It literally listed everything I said. Something that first gets the body sweating and then dials into the movement, right?
So what kind of movements do you think would be best? Like, we jog, right? Would that be a good idea, or what do you recommend would be a better way to? Because my concern is not everybody can jog. Maybe some people do have knee problems, but they still want to train jiu-jitsu. What would be a better way to kind of get the body going, but still keeping in mind that maybe some people don't have that ability, or just kind of trying to get a sense of what could be better? How can we as instructors can maximize the experience for everyone and still get that benefit?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, and it's a tricky one because there's no one answer. It just depends on every student's body. But I think the greatest thing that we can do as teachers, and this is just something I'm trying to do more and more, is develop enough tools in my students that they know how to warm up their specific body to what they need. And so yeah, we'll do some full class warm-ups, but also now in my classes, what I try to do is, my class is different, but I think these principles can be applied, is that, for example, I will show a hip mobility routine, 10 minutes, how to fire up your hips open, and I'll show a shoulder opening routine, and I'll show a shoulder strengthening routine, and I'll show a hip strengthening routine, and I'll show these routines in different practices until the students have enough tools to know, oh, I need my hips more open, I need my hips more strong. And then I usually leave it where we do 5 minutes of group warming up, and then I do like a 5-minute independent study warm up. And so everybody's doing what they need in their body at that time because they have the tools to access what they need. So that's like where I'm trying to gear towards. It develop enough intelligence in my students where some students they have crazy mobility. They have their splits, they just were born with that. So they need stability. So they're focusing a lot on strengthening exercises for those 5 minutes. They're doing squats, they're doing like loaded activities. And then some students have the tightest hips possible. I think like we can see like in the jiu-jitsu world, tight hips is something that comes up often. So I would suggest maybe like as just like a general rule, I would do maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes real quick jogging. And then I would do 5 minutes of hip opening and spine opening. Those are things that help a lot of practitioners. And we can talk about that in depth at some point, like what stretches I personally dislike, like different squatting patterns that open up your mobility in the hips. And then I would do just a little bit of joint prep before I dial into jiu-jitsu. Joint prepping looks like getting my wrists on fire, getting my shoulders fully activated, getting my ankle, knee, hips on board, just getting my joints ready because jiu-jitsu is a joint-based game. Like it's literally, can I break your joint or can I cut off your airflow? It's one or the other. I'm going to break your joint or I'm going to cut off your airflow. Um, so that being said, like prepping the joints robustly, and so like I think a really good thorough warm up, if done, can be 15 minutes, 15 to 20. More could be better, but like I mean, we need time for jujitsu, so like we have to balance that out. Um, so yeah, that would be my suggestion is like 5 minutes jogging, 5 minutes hip and shoulder open, hip, spine and shoulder opening, and then 5 minutes joint prepping, and then dial into a couple specific exercises. And after that, we would start the jiu-jitsu practice. I don't know if your practices are an hour or an hour and a half. If they were an hour and a half, that this would be a great program. If they were an hour, we would have to learn how to streamline it, and also just suggest to our students, you should be warming up before class. Like, like we'll do our best. You're muted, Diego.
No, yeah, all this is important. Like now, the whole idea of stretching and moving into this a class like jujitsu, a general class, even if it's just like a few classes, just to get again the body used to the movements and the idea, right? Used to the whole idea of stretching and this type of stretching, before the class is ideal.
Yeah, yeah. And so then I think after that, cool down is the same thing. Maybe like a 5 minute guided cool down, but telling people you might have to cool down also after class. Like you
Right,
might have to spend a couple minutes on your own because you can only provide so much for somebody's practice if you only have an hour time span. And it's
right.
really up to the student to take it to their own level afterwards. But giving them tools and explaining to them why a cool down is important would be fantastic. Like I think a lot of people kind of roll their eyes at a cool down or even a warm up. But like once
Yeah,
you can just explain the why, people are pretty fired up about it and they're like excited to hack their body and understand how their nervous system works and how to really protect it.
yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. After hearing you, I feel more like I have a better understanding as to again the why, right? Because the idea of it, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm cooling down because for me, my mindset, my last roll, or whatever the case may be, is kind of the cool down, and then you're hanging out, kind of like letting your body relax a little bit, which is an idea of a cool down. But this brings it a whole different perspective to it, another importance to it, that it's again the longevity of jujitsu. If we're just thinking of something short term or whatever the case may be, it may not matter for most. But if you're thinking about the longevity of jujitsu, the advice that we would give to white belts, beginners, and people walking into the door, now it's going to be with a different with this understanding.
Right. Right, and that makes sense because
Yeah.
there's tons of memes, and it's like an inside joke that
Mhm.
only white belts and blue belts are really enjoying the warm up. Purple belts and above, they come late to class because they want to skip the warm up. And now that you basically are going to explain as an instructor, I feel like now I know how to approach that conversation in telling them you should come to warm ups, not because it's just, I know you're tired of the routine, but there's such a huge benefit overall for your body, that you can get them to buy in to that particular, and hopefully show up to class on time, right? But so that's an interesting message to be
Yeah.
able to deliver that for sure.
Yeah.
And warm-ups can be super fun and sexy. Like it doesn't have to look like something that, like, I'm plenty of times warming people up through handstands. Like it's just something that it's a fun skill to develop, but at the same time, it brings a sweat quickly. You
Yeah.
already are hitting major joints. Your shoulder, elbow, wrist is supporting your full body weight, so you're getting a lot of great feedback in that system. And then it's something that's exciting before we start class. We'll do like 5 to 10 minutes, real quick wrist prep, real quick shoulder prep, real quick hips, and then we'll end with handstands. And we're just doing, everybody's trying to get their handstand better. And over 6 months, people progress in that warm up too. So it's not like a warm up that has a dead end. Like there's just, it can go for the rest of your life. Once you get your handstand in the middle of the room, then you start working on shapes and like, but this is just like a concept. I'm not saying like everybody needs a handstand. I'm saying warm ups can be fun. And especially if there's skill based warm ups, like where every time you warm up, you get a little better at that concept. It can be exciting.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk just to find out how we can create a program to be able to make it more dynamic, make it more fun, that it's not necessarily that routine. So you still maintain a level of engagement and enjoy it when you're part of it and when you're starting to roll and lead class. So definitely interested in talking to you more about that. So, but Dr. Harnoor, I thank you so much for your time. I know we're reaching an hour. I appreciate your advice so much. This is awesome.
Yes.
I wanted to give you 30 seconds. Let me know where, or let the crowd know, let the people, the viewers know where they can find you, how they can benefit from you, what you're doing, what you're offering. I know you're still doing the movement classes. Where can they benefit from that? 30 seconds for you.
Totally. I would say my biggest platform is just my Instagram, Movement with Noor. I talk about the body there. I talk about how you can contact me. And it's set up where whatever the needs are, some people like one-on-one training, and I train people through their body, through their patterns and their goals. And then sometimes people just want like to come to classes. All that's on my Instagram. Check it out.
Awesome.
Dr. Harnoor, man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Everything was so valuable. I mean, for me, you blew my mind, man. So hopefully we can, advance our programs, advance, with the things that we're doing with your help, your advice, and I'm sure that my brother will want to have a second conversation with you. But yes,
sure.
thank you so much for taking the time. I'm out of your busy schedule, and much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Diego. Thank you, Dr. Anand. This was
Thank you so
like
much.
Thank
so
you.
exciting, and I hope we get to keep it up.
Absolutely, and hopefully get you on the mat. Right, I want to get you to go.
Yeah,
Come
for
show and
sure.
train.
I'm coming.
All
Yeah.
right.
More times to come.
All right. Awesome. And we'll get to see you
Awesome.
soon. All right. Thank you, Dr. Harnoor. Have a great
Yeah.
weekend. Take care.
You
All right. That
All
was
right.
Dr. Harnoor. Amazing
Awesome.
advice. I didn't really think of things in that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So,
sure.
we unfortunately we kind of go up the ranks following what your instructors taught you. And it goes to show you how important it is to educate yourself, not only just to cross train, but also educate yourself outside of your own art, so that you can carry that into and benefit not only yourself but also your students. So
Yeah,
I'm definitely looking
absolutely.
to continue this conversation with Dr. Harnoor. So
For sure. Yeah, thank you so much, man, for bringing him on. And I'm excited to talk to him afterwards as well
yeah,
to, see how we move forward with it. But
awesome.
awesome, man.
So
All right, bro.
with that, two shout outs before we leave. The first is happy 40th anniversary to all the hermanos of La Unidad Latina, Lambda, Upsilon, Lambda. Yesterday was the 40th year of the fraternity, and getting a chance today to basically shout out all the hermanos from the beginning till current day. Much love to all you guys. And then the second thing is shout out to the Movement Lab for hosting us yesterday to do the Lasso Guard seminar. We wanted to definitely shout them out and everyone who came out to support. It was a great experience. Had a lot of fun, and we'll definitely have to do it again. I know they're closing the doors, but like I've mentioned, when one journey ends, another journey begins. So there's plenty of other things to come, and we'll definitely be sharing that moving forward on our personal handles on IG. So with that said, another week is coming. Get on the mats, train hard, train smart, and train safe, right? All right. So with
Yeah.
that, we'll see each other next week. All right. Para
Para
siempre,
siempre.
guys. Take care. Us.